Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Williams, and I am the incoming president of the Cole Leadership Fellows at Fuqua. So we are so excited to help host tonight's session with General Brown. I was telling him earlier this evening that I have had several people contact me personally saying how excited they are for this session. So we will be sure to not disappoint. Before I kick it off with his bio, I just want to let you know about this series. So this is the Leading Through Challenges discussion series, and it's put on with the Coach K Center in partnership with a number of organizations, including Business-Oriented Women, Duke Engineering, Baldwin Scholars, Student Affairs, and the American Grand Society. So thank you so much for all of those partners. And now for our special guest of honor, I am so excited to introduce you to General Brown. He is a retired four-star general for the military, which is an incredible feat. A lot of people don't know that he was actually recruited by Coach K to play basketball at West Point originally, which then later led to his military career. That is where he attained the highest rank in the military of a four-star general over 38 years of service around the world. Thank you so much for that. He was actually the 216th four-star general, and fun fact, George Washington was actually the first. Since then, he had led several 100,000 soldiers during numerous crisis situations, including humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, hurricanes, typhoons, tsunamis, pandemics, obviously very much in relation to what we're going through today. And just to put that magnitude in perspective, a few 100,000, Google as a company only has 100,000 employees. So this is a magnificent feat. And we are so pleased to have you this evening. So with that, General Brown, I know you've mentioned a few topics that you think will really help the group really learn about resiliency and working through this time of crisis and the power of teamwork. So with that, I will kick it off with some of your opening remarks.
Well, thanks very much, Michelle. I really appreciate it. Very too kind in that introduction. It's just the way my mother wrote it, and very, very well done. But the thanks, and I'm really honored. I will say the Cole Board Center of Leadership and Ethics, I've been very fortunate to be a part of it for going on 9 years now. It is really the highlight of my year. Very, very proud. I learn every time so much. And it highlights here, you might be saying, what the heck would a military guy be able to tell me about, leading in a crisis? He's dealing with different situations, combat, humanitarian assistance, things like that, as Michelle was talking. But really, what I find every time, leadership is leadership. And I go back to, I learned more about leadership on the basketball court from Coach K at West Point than anywhere else. And West Point's a great leadership school. And so the principles definitely apply, and I continue to learn from Coach K. So, sports, military, business, academia, medical community, first responders, it does not matter. The challenges are very similar, and that leadership is so critical, no doubt about it. So I'll talk really just a few key things as was mentioned. I've had the opportunity to deal with everything from trying to help people survive a typhoon that just happened, to tsunamis, to peacekeeping operations, very tense situations. And then probably the most challenging by far is in combat operations, where every single day decisions you make, lives are literally on the line on the decision you make. So I won't go into a whole bunch of war stories and things like that, but just some principles as we look at this. First, I think it's really important. We're facing a changing world, and the military tends to see some of these changes first as you're put in these tough scenarios. You kind of go through it earlier than the rest of society. You're seeing these changes. That's what's happened over the last 10, 15 years significantly, where, globalization has so many positive things it's done for us. But also there's challenges that globalization has brought to us. And if you think about, we went from a world where leaders had to deal with not enough information, believe it or not. For all of you, that might shock you. You couldn't Google things. You couldn't use Wikipedia. You couldn't, you had no ability. You had limited amounts of information, and then you had to make a decision. So the principles were much different for leadership because you're only going to get so much. Well, now the challenge has completely changed, and it's getting more complex every single day. Now the challenge is too much information, overwhelming amounts of information. And I would say it's, you're looking in those haystacks of information out there. Where are the golden needles to help me make a decision as a leader? How do I find those? And just think, the other tremendous change is how rapidly information diffuses today. I was explaining this once and someone said, oh yeah, well in the Civil War, they had the telegraph that sent information pretty quickly. That's true, but it didn't diffuse it very rapidly. It took a long time. If you look now, you can send a tweet and seconds later it's around the world, the response. I mean, who would have ever thought of that a few years ago? So what does this all lead to? Well, we have these terms we've used a long time in militaries. We're planning for what's going to happen. In the military, you really have to kind of worst case many scenarios. You have to be ready. You can't, boy, I didn't think about that one. And these things would come about, we'd call them black swans. And a black swan is something that comes out of nowhere and surprises you. Probably the best example of my lifetime I can think of is 911. Everybody was just shocked. Who would think that airplanes would be used for that purpose, that would happen? It was a black swan, came out of nowhere. Some people may be able to say you could trace it, but really it was not expected at all. And then there's another one, there's black swans, and then the other one that's out there are called pink flamingos. And I always think of a flamingo on somebody's lawn, a pink flamingo. It's there, but you don't really notice it. And you go by it all the time. It's on your neighbor's lawn. So a pink flamingo's out there. It's something that could happen, but you don't really pay attention to it. You don't prepare for it the way you should. I would say COVID-19 right now is a pink flamingo. You could argue maybe it's a little bit of black swan, came out of nowhere, but I said, well, you had, the other Ebola, SARS, all these things leading up to it. It was sitting there on the lawn as a pink flamingo, and then it hit. We weren't as prepared as we could have been. The challenge is, when I was sitting where you were, that was the exception, black swans and pink flamingos. Now that's the norm. That is absolutely the norm, that these things will come out of nowhere. So this, as leaders, challenges you, no matter what field you're in. These unexpected events will happen. You can plan all you want, and planning is good because it gives you somewhere to start from. Planning is never a waste of time, but you're going to plan and then be hit from nowhere with these black swans and pink flamingos and things that are going to happen. So resilience on that, resilience is not surviving through that. As you look and you analyze, surviving and is sustainment, but resilience is thriving in this change, in these unexpected. Resilience means that you can accept the change. Yes, it surprises you, it sets you back, but you learn quickly and then you thrive. And so in the Army, as we were dealing with this change, we were finding that all of a sudden leaders at all levels, from the very youngest to the most senior, really set back by things that were happening. But we had to develop that resilience. And how do you develop that? Well, you develop resilience in a number of ways, and we really broke it down in the military: spiritual, physical, emotional, social, and family aspects. And I won't go into all of those. I can answer any questions in that, but I will tell you they're all important. They're all key. And it doesn't mean when something happens you're going to be afraid. And you're going to need that courage. And courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to overcome that fear, because there's something more important out there than the fear. You're going to be afraid. There's no doubt about it. So building that resilience, and you're going to go through things. You're going to get knocked down a lot. And the important thing is, I think one of my favorite Nelson Mandela quotes, he said, hey, it's don't judge me on my success. Judge me on how many times I failed and rose up from that failure. That's resilience and thriving in that ambiguity and chaos. And we used to, this has changed some leadership principles, again, no matter what field you're in. And we can talk about this further, but some of them, for example, we used to be leaders who could kind of be the know-it-all in charge and very controlling and say, do this, I don't want to hear, I know everything. Well, that's long gone. Leadership now takes a humility. And I would say another tremendous leader that I admire a ton, General Marty Dempsey, retired former chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. He would say it takes a humility with confidence. And why does it take humility? Because it's the humility to admit, I don't have all the answers. We need everybody. These things are going to come from nowhere. We need everybody participating. And guess what? I don't care what organization you're in. The best ideas come from those closest to the problem on the cutting edge. In the Army, that's those young leaders out there that are closest to being in harm's way. They'll have the best ideas. So you have to have that humility to get those ideas. How do you get them within, and the humility to know? And oh, by the way, it takes a more confident leader to stand up in front of a group, and instead of acting like the know-it-all, much more confident leaders say, I do not have all the answers. I may be the CEO, I may be the COO, I may be the general. I don't have all the answers. We need you to help solve these complex and challenging problems that we're being faced with today, the new norm of coming from nowhere. And also some differences, really changing. You've got to be much more inclusive instead of exclusive in your leadership. And then, it's you have to build a trust. And certainly with that trust comes that empowerment to empower those that work for you. So all these things have changed. And I think one other key thing I noticed, again, from when I was young, it had drilled into me, when you're a leader, you make a decision, never change your mind. Make the decision. Oh, if you change your mind, you're wishy-washy, you're indecisive. Well, that's, again, very old think. Today, you're a fool if you don't change your mind, because you're going to get info. 10 minutes later, you're going to get more info. The challenge says too much info, but it's going to give you more. And you'll see leaders that don't change their mind. They don't want to appear wishy-washy. And everybody in the organization knows that's just stupid. And they're like, why aren't they adjusting? They have more info. Why aren't they changing their mind? So these are some of the things that have changed. I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that as we go on. And as we get to the question. So I think, it's key that in an organization, you're going to face a crisis. You're going to have challenges. And unfortunately today, again, there's some fantastic aspects of globalization, everything that is going on, but there's also some incredible challenges that it creates. And we're seeing that. And you're going to be faced with these black swans, pink flamingos on a regular basis. Are you resilient enough to thrive in that ambiguity and chaos and move forward, and your whole organization will benefit? Can you empower your people, get the best information, and help solve these complex problems? I think, again, today, there's no better example when you look where folks are working together, solving problems. It's amazing what's happening, how quickly we're getting at solutions across the board for so many challenges. And where folks are staying in their stovepipe and not working together, we're really missing opportunities, no doubt about it. So let me open it up for questions here, because nothing's worse than 8 o'clock at night here and I'm talking away. Let me let you ask questions and what's on your mind, and see if I can answer it in a way that'll help you out.
Great. And just to reiterate, I know a few people trickled in after, but if you could drop your questions right into the chat box, that would be great. I will kick it off with, it's actually a requote of yours, General Brown, but I was reading an article that you were quoted in with Forbes, and you mentioned that there's a big difference between a group and a team. And, throwing a group of people together, regardless of how talented they are or what resources they have, does not constitute a team. So in your vast experience throughout the military and, I'm sure now in civilian life, if you could just elaborate on that a little bit more for the group as to what you see as the best practices for a great team.
Yeah. Oh, well, thanks, Michelle. That's a great question. And it's interesting because I would say, I'm often asked, like, what did I learn from Coach K at West Point? And the number one thing I'll say is how to really develop a team. He's just a master at it. He was, 40 years ago. He continues to develop and be a master at today. And so that's a great point. I think there's a lot of folks out there that have groups. There are a lot of groups that aren't teams. Teams really develop a trust. And trust, the tough thing about trust, it's absolutely critical on a team. And trust is hard because you have to work it. Trust is built in small moments over and over again, little things and incredible repetition. And the challenge of it is, though, it can be lost in a nanosecond. It takes a while to gain it. It can be lost very quickly. Someone on your team comes to you, for help, and you don't help, you can lose that trust very, very quickly. But trust is the most essential part of a team, no doubt about it, that helps that team then rely on each other and trust each other and then they can be empowered. And again, a group, you can empower a group, but a group is never going to have the same trust as what I would call a team. I have people that worked for me 40 years ago, and I give them they'll say, hey, sir, I remember the fist from Coach K, where if you got somebody like this, you're just going to break a finger like I broke that one there. But if you go at them together, you're going to make a difference. A team together. And Coach K, of course, has named everyone, he's amazing as a team builder, named every finger of the fist and working together. But I think for a team, building that trust is absolutely key. And as you're building that, again, it takes incredible communication. The team has to have trust in each other enough that they can say, hey, what you're doing there upsets me. It can't be all good. It's often going to be the good, the bad, the ugly, and then you can really trust each other. You really have to have that vision for the team. Every team, I don't care if it's a team of 2 people or 2 million, they want a vision. Where are we going? What's our purpose? Everybody wants a purpose. And I feel very, very fortunate. I think one of the huge advantages in the military that I went in, as you mentioned, to play basketball at West Point for Coach K, and never imagined serving in the military, but I found I loved the service to something greater than self and the purpose. So how important that purpose is, and kept me on that team for 4 decades serving. And so that purpose and vision that the leader establishes is so critical. And I think, there's no doubt that if you work on it, a team can accomplish anything. We all want to be part of a team, something bigger than ourselves that we can be proud of. And it gives you courage to lean on your teammates that you're not going to have alone, and you're not necessarily going to have with a group. That's just not a team. I mean, a group can be good, can never be as good as a true team. And so, again, I would just take a look as you're learning and all your studies there. And boy, nobody prepares you better than the Cole Fellowship and working together with your fellow students. You're going to learn so much together. How do you develop teams? How you develop teams? There's some amazing Sim Sitkin, San Yin. That team there is unbelievable. The Cole team. You're watching them, and then you'll get exposure to things like Coach Kane across some of the tremendous business leaders and others, and you'll see that. And it is absolutely critical to success in any organization, I believe, no doubt. Thanks.
Fantastic. Especially knowing that so many of us do try to make this large impact on our team, on the greater organization, and the world, but keeping in mind that trust is built in those small moments, I think is a very impactful portion to remember. And speaking of Sim Sitkin, our first question, we said, you mentioned the 5 military foundations of resilience. What about the analytical capabilities to assess and adapt and having institutional resilience? For example, trusting our institutions.
Yeah, no, that's Sim always asks tough questions. I forgot to tell him, hey, no tough questions now, come on. But he's just jealous because I was an offensive player and Sim was a defensive player. That's so he's asking me a tough question there. No, I'm just kidding. So the data, the data and the analysis, first of all, trusting in yourself, trusting in your team, these are key aspects when you look at resiliency and the ability. And I think it's a tremendous point by Sim that you could add there across all of those. I talked about 5 dimensions in resiliency, spiritual, physical, emotional, social, and family. The data can help you a lot. And if you don't use it right, it can hurt you a lot. Because, the data is going to, if you analyze it properly, and I would say today, again, the trouble is overwhelming amounts of information. As we get better with this, the world's going to continue to get more complex. But fortunately, we have AI, machine learning, and data analysis that's getting better and better and better. So if you set up the right parameters, that data can tell you a lot and help you in its analysis, which is a tremendous point. It can help you to see where you're not quite doing well, good enough, and where you're achieving things, and it can be accurate. You have to always be careful, cautious with data. I'm always cautious that garbage in is garbage out. So you have to, and I worry in artificial intelligence in particular that it's too small a group that knows what's going into those algorithms and what they're asking for. And I worry that the leaders aren't involved enough to make sure they're getting the right data. But if done right, data can tell you a lot and help you a lot. And the challenge is, I remember when, again, early on in the military, kind of leading ahead of business and others, we figured out how to get lots of information, lots of data, leverage systems. And I remember my staff coming to me with mounds of information, and they were all proud. They said, "Look at this, all we could get you." This is when I was a colonel, 15 years ago. And, and they're just saying, "Look at all this info." And I said, "It doesn't do me any good. I don't have time to read 1,000 pages of it. I mean, I'm impressed you could get that. Now you got to figure out how to analyze that and give me that data that helps me make a decision, an informed decision. Oh, by the way, you got like 30 minutes as well. Take your time, So data is very important, but overwhelming amounts don't do you any good. How do you find that data will really help you make that decision? I talked about, finding that golden needle in the haystacks of information that'll help you make a smart, informed decision. And in our case, lives are on the line. It could be money on the line. In any scenario, it could be you want the best data, the data to help you make that decision. Great point, Sim, and something certainly to look at.
Thank you so much. Our next question comes from Sanyan.
Another tough one, I'm sure. There.
We're not taking it easy tonight. I apologize. She mentions her questions around developing leaders, which is so poignant for this group here and our time at Fuqua. A lot of us have managed people in the past, but I think there's a big difference between managing people and truly developing leaders, which is really that next level. So, if you could give advice to us, how do you develop your reports into better leaders?
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, Sanyan, for that question, because I'm really proud. I had folks that developed me, again, starting with Coach K, but then leaders throughout my career that invested in me and developed me. And it just struck me as it really had an impact on me. I would never have made it more than a week without this investment and what they taught me and learning from that. Leadership development is critical. It's your investment in the future. I'm very proud I was able to work that for the entire Army. I was in charge of leadership development, and we really tried to, we put it in the first ever leadership development manual the Army developed in over 240 plus years, how to develop leaders. And what's key is it really takes, everyone wants to be developed, but no one will want to take the time. Everybody's too busy. Oh, they're too busy for leader development. But it's absolutely key, and you've got to invest the time, and it takes time, but it is so well worth it. Before my first deployment to combat operations, we did a lot of leader development at all levels, just developing and developing, I thought maybe too much. Every week we're doing tons of leadership development, really working, putting people in scenarios. And as we talked about in this world that's, if you're going to thrive in ambiguity and chaos, you have to develop leaders. They're not going to, you have to practice them, or you can't give them a problem and, hey, here's a solution, walk through it, one step at a time. No, you give them the outcome you want, get out of their way and watch how they respond. And then you build on that as you're developing those leaders. And when we were preparing to deploy, I thought we did too much. And what I found was you can never do too much. The feedback I got while deployed in harm's way, everybody said, wow, we glad we did so much leader development. And I wish we had done even more. And I thought I'd done too much. It's absolutely key. It's an investment. Now, one of the challenges is it'd be great if you could develop a leader and you'd have a clear scale of where they were when they started. Whoop, and look at this. Here they are. They're so much better. But obviously that's very difficult to measure sometimes. You can, if you're working, it's smart why a lot of people work with coaches. Business has really learned that leader development. I think about 5 years ago, they were not developing leaders, and you saw a lot of folks would be frustrated and jump from company to company to company. Now there are a lot of programs out there in business that they've learned we've got to invest in folks, and it's really an expectation. It's not wow, this is great, you're doing this. It's an expectation that they're developed as leaders, and then they feel that loyalty to the company. It gets back to being part of that team. You invest in them, but it is often hard to measure, and when budget cuts come around, time is short, people will often cut the leader development. It doesn't have a clear measurement of, but I will tell you that as a leader, the most satisfaction I got in 40 plus years overall, working in the military, were those folks I developed and seeing them be successful. Greater satisfaction than anything I ever did myself by far. And really proud. I had folks I taught when I taught at West Point as a captain, taught as cadets that are now generals, folks I worked with as captains, and and just folks that have done so well. You get immense satisfaction from that investment. I think one of the challenges is you don't always see it immediately. It usually takes time. So that, but it is absolutely critical. I think companies are doing a better and better job in realizing they have to do it. I know my youngest daughter, three daughters, my oldest is a major in the military, and the middle one's married to a major in the military and also a special education teacher. And then my youngest is in business. And the business she's in, working Mercedes-Benz, they really invested in her in a leader development program. And it really struck her. She traveled around the world. They had speakers and investment, a big investment. And I remember her saying, boy, I love this company. I'll stay with them forever because they really invested, and that will pay off. Those type investments makes a huge difference, especially with these challenging times and the resiliency required to thrive in ambiguity and chaos. Okay, thanks, Anya.
Sorry, yeah, viewing your time and your energy as an investment in people, it's definitely a reflection of your own success when you can see them thrive as well. Our next question is definitely no easier, and I had the same question, so I'm excited I've been asked this. But thinking of the Navy aircraft commander who recently sent out a letter regarding coronavirus on his ship, and I believe was later looked at as being possibly reinstated. How do you balance between protocol and process and doing what you really believe is right and humane?
That's a great question. It really is a great question. You will be faced with challenges like this, maybe not an aircraft carrier, but I'll tell you in business, your character will be challenged in the world, no doubt. And you're the only one that can, give up your character. And I admire that this Navy captain felt it was the right thing to do. Maybe he didn't, there may have been some impact and borderline where there's security issues. That's, I won't really get into that, but it's interesting. I really feel like he felt like he was doing the right thing for his crew. Now, even though it's a big military, there's the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guardsmen are really not part of the Department of Defense, but work closely with us and as part of the Department of Homeland Security. But each service has their own culture, and it's very, very interesting. The Navy's culture is a little different, certainly different than the Marines, different than the Army. And in each culture, in the Army, if you would stand up for your soldiers and say, look, this isn't right, and I'm concerned for them, and make that point known, that's what they expect. They expect you to do that. And they wouldn't really, I would say they wouldn't worry about the protocol. They would be worried about taking care of the soldiers. It's just a philosophy. We eat last, for example. Leaders eat last is a book out there that, but it really got that from the military. It's just the leadership. The higher up you go in the leadership, the more you're there to serve those below you. Now, I'm not saying it's not like that in the Navy, but it is different. It's different on the ground when you're saying follow me, and you have to inspire a group. As opposed to, you're on a ship and you have to inspire them to do their job. But where are they going to go? It's just a little bit different. They're on the ship's turning right, they're going to turn right. A little bit different, just the way it is, those cultures. So I can see why there may have been some concern. Maybe he didn't choose the right method. But, I personally hope he's reinstated because I think his heart was in the right place. He was taking care of his sailors, and that's most important. But different cultures, oftentimes when something goes wrong, it's another difference in the culture. If something goes wrong in the Navy operation, they immediately remove the commander. No matter who, before they even investigate, you're removed from command. Whereas in the Army, the Marines, Air Force, they will investigate before they'll suspend the commander, maybe, but they won't remove them until they've investigated. So it's just differences. But I think it goes most important to you will face tough challenges for folks that work with you. You will face tough challenges where someone may ask you to fudge some numbers or do something that's borderline illegal. You'll face these challenges. You don't always see it when you're preparing for leadership roles and you're preparing, but boy, you will face it in the world. And so you have to maintain your character. I admire that Navy captain did in his character. He felt he needed to take care of his sailors. So may have been the wrong method, but I hope they put him back in. That's my opinion. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your transparency on that answer and
Sure.
for adding a little bit more clarity into the due process system.
Probably more clarity than you ever wanted on the service
no, we
functions, but
appreciate
it is interesting. They're very different.
I mean, yeah, to the point you made earlier, we're overly inundated with different portions of information, so it's hard to discern between fact and fiction sometimes, or just generally understanding why the process is what it is. So I appreciate it, and I'm sure others do as well. The next question comes from a good friend of mine, Caroline Queen. She says, I also have a question around the military, spiritual, emotional, family, etc. elements. How do you recommend laying that out from a teaching perspective? Is it such that you need to understand emotional fully prior to achieving spiritual, or would you teach all of the elements at once?
That's a great question by Caroline. There is no, Caroline, there's no set order in spiritual, physical, emotional, social, and family that, when we're teaching it, it's a balance of all those. You can have someone who, has 4 of the 5 and the 5th, maybe it's a family issue, is pulling their attention away. So that's why they look at, it's a complete person, if you will. And one of the challenges, in the military, we certainly aren't saying you have to have a religion. For example, the spiritual is your own personal, whether that's, a religious belief you've had, from your family values, or whether that's a mindfulness that you get from meditation, but you have to address that spirit, the human spirit, so critical. And you can't leave it off to me, it's the most important. When you see folks in challenging situations, life or death, tough situations, that is the one that I've seen the most often pops up and is the most challenging if you haven't addressed it before there's a crisis and a challenge. You can, once a challenge and crisis occurs, but much better to work on these dimensions, this resiliency, before the crisis. And then, physical is, again, you can have all the others, but if you're not physically taking care of yourself, you're working 22 hours a day, what good are you going to be to somebody? There's a balance in the physical. The emotional, there's, emotional intelligence and the emotional aspect of what you're dealing with. It doesn't mean that you are void of emotions, but you know how, one of my favorite quotes of all time that to me speaks to, the emotional intelligence. Maya Angelou says, they're not going to remember what you said. They're not going to remember what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I look back to those toughest moments, a moment in combat where we lost several beloved leaders and soldiers just killed, and going to that unit. And first of all, the leader has to be there, and you don't know what to say. I don't remember what I said, but I do remember how I felt. And you're all there crying together and emotionally. And years later, those folks who were there said, I don't remember what you said, but I remember how you made me feel. And that's so important, that dimension. And so you have to, again, if you can deal with it before a crisis, much better. You can do it in the middle of it, but it's much better if you work these things out beforehand. Social, again, that gets back to that team in a lot of aspects that we were talking about, and how you're working that social aspect is so key. Doesn't mean you're an introvert, you have to be an extrovert, or vice versa, whatever it said, how do you relate socially, and how are you balanced socially? You're not overdoing it. And then family, again, another key one. And I think there's no doubt that you have to, we were challenged in combat, something never faced before in combat operations, where young private, although, could be FaceTiming with his family moments before going out on a mission. And, the son just had an accident. And now they're dealing with that family issue and emotion and everything while they're out, supposed to be, on patrol and at their best and ready. So, you can see the family issues, you have to have that balance and really work those family issues, all those together. And so they're really key for resiliency. And, if you, before a crisis, another key aspect of resiliency, nobody can do it alone. We're tough. It's amazing what the human spirit, human beings can do and take and put up with. But well, you're a heck of a lot better if you have that person and individuals you can go to help you in those tough times. And that's really smart to establish those before. And for me, when I was in the toughest of times, worst day of my life in combat, I could talk to my wife, Patty, of, now 38 years. And, just that was the rock for me. And I had a chaplain who I could talk to. But I'd established that obviously long before the crisis, which is really smart if you can develop during the crisis. Yeah. Much better if you do it before. So that's how I would answer that. There's no particular order, but they're all important. And any one of them is missing, you won't handle it as well. And you may find challenges you're going to have to work through even more than when you're, surprised by an event that's going to happen. And you certainly won't be thriving in that ambiguity and chaos if you can't pull them all together. Long answer. Sorry. That's a good question.
I appreciate it. Your answer actually addressed some of the next question, which was around the difficult conversations that are had within the military and the juxtaposition of that with conversations with an employee or a spouse. And it sounds like a lot of it is this concept of constant communication, preparedness, thinking of things beforehand. So we definitely appreciate your insight there.
And I would add to that, you're exactly right. You're spot on. Those difficult, and they are tough. Those conversations you're going to have when you get in your first leadership role, someone's not performing or just not helping the team. They're doing, and you're going to, those are tough conversations. And one thing I would tell you is always plan on about 5 times as long as you think it's going to take. You will think, I can get this done in 15 minutes. No, it's not going to happen. And then, really a key, empathy is such a key characteristic that, you have to be able to put yourself in others to really be an effective leader. That humility to know you don't have all the answers, but the empathy to see their perspective and what they're facing is so critical and will make a huge, huge difference. I've got a barking dog in the background here. Hold on a second. Wants to get out. Anyway, she's a little spoiled. So, but anyway, that empathy is absolutely key to ensure that you can put yourself in their position, because there might be very good reasons, and if you don't show that empathy, they're just not going to respect and listen to you when you have those tough conversations. No doubt about it.
Absolutely. I do want to try to get to one more question. I know we're approaching time. I think this is a fantastic question from Jeff Gleichman. A defining aspect of the military is its strict hierarchy, and yet military branches frequently face extremely complex challenges with little precedent to draw on. Can you expand on how you foster the creativity required to overcome those challenges within that context?
Jeff, that's a great question. I'd say that's something that's changed significantly. You would not believe how creative folks in the military are today. You're right. The hierarchy was ridiculous when I was a much younger officer, 15, 20 years ago. And it's very much like Ori Brofman's Starfish and the Spider. The military was a spider organization. And, what happens to a spider? You cut off a leg, another leg, and finally it dies. And the starfish, of course, you cut off a leg, it grows back. And I had a starfish organization 20 years ago within a spider hierarchy. It can be done. Now, I would say the entire military has moved to be more of a starfish-like organization. We went from, for example, command and control was our method, where go left, go right, you could look and see and tell everybody, just like that incredible hierarchy. And business was the same way. Business often mirrors the military leadership and vice versa. And again, leadership is leadership across the board. And now we realize, 12 years ago, we said, wait a minute, that's not working. It's too slow, that hierarchy. You don't have time to go all the way up and all the way down the chain. So the new method, in fact, which General Dempsey established in the military and tried to work for the entire military when he was chairman of Joint Chiefs, is mission command, empowerment, where you don't tell them what to do, you build that trust, you give them a mission, they figure out, and that creativity is unbelievable. Why is it so creative in the military? Well, it's fairly simple in that lives are on the line. And I've seen, young soldiers out in harm's way, even if their leadership isn't as empowering as they should be, they will be incredibly creative. Why? Because their life is on the line. It depends on it. And they'll be incredibly creative and come up with things you would never think of. And it's the exact same in business. Those closest to the problem often know the best solution, and they'll come up with those creative solutions. We would actually start, when I was deployed in combat, we had, and this is now started 15, 16 years ago, recognizing that creativity and innovation awards recognized every night, presenting awards for innovation, developing long before it had been done elsewhere. Lessons learned that would be shared every day from the Fox. You could share from a private in the foxhole all the way up to the general. 30,000 people could share their ideas to save lives and create, techniques that would save lives that were shared instantly. Just amazing, the creativity. And never would have seen as much before, but it continues to grow. So the very method of how you command has changed. And yeah, there's still a structure and a hierarchy, but it is more the starfish and more adaptable, and mission command, empowerment, trust is absolutely the key and essential. And the other aspect of that's a challenge in business today, as I speak with business leaders all around the world. And one of the challenges they're having, the same one the military is having as well, is where does the buck stop if something goes wrong? This is a challenge in empowerment. You got to empower as much as you can. You got to trust. When something goes wrong, if you don't stand and say, okay, relieve me, fire me instead of, my subordinate who made this decision, if it was made, with all the right intention, you'll never get creativity and empowerment, and you'll never get the best solutions. But where does the buck stop? How high up do you go? I was briefing the Secretary of Defense one time on a challenge that happened. I had to investigate a challenge that had happened, and soldiers were killed tragically. And I had to investigate and brief him. And first thing he said to me was, well, everybody should be fired because the leaders were in charge and the soldiers, died, they failed. So they should all be relieved. And I said, okay, then where does it stop? Sir, I threw a sir in there. I said, where does it stop? You should be relieved and the president should be relieved because you're all in the chain of command. So where does the buck stop? So no, you've got to, if the leader did what a reasonable person should do, and you did everything in your power that should be done, well, you can't have higher expectations than that. If they did something intentionally that caused it, of course. Or did something illegal, immoral, of course. But if they're doing the right thing and they did the best they could with the information they had, you've got to back them or you'll never get empowerment and that creativity that Jeff was asking about in this question. So great question. Thanks very much. Sorry, all long answers, but they were great questions and none of them easy answers, I would say.
We love it. I don't think we could have ended on a higher note either. I mean, this concept of accountability is from school here, but I think that we're starting to see how impactful it is in greater society. When you look at these massive corporations and the leaders who are truly stepping up and showing their humility and taking full responsibility for their organizations, I think it's very, very inspirational.
Yeah.
So with that said, I want to thank you so much. This has been beyond a pleasure. I am thrilled to get to know you in the future as a board member on Cole. So we're thrilled to have you in that seat. And at this point, I will kick it off to Sonia to wrap up with some final comments.
Thanks, Michelle. And I really appreciate, thanks for everybody joining in. I look forward to seeing you at Duke, and we can get back together here and for sure. And hopefully the Cole board will be on track in October for the meeting. But thanks very much. Really enjoyed it, Sonia. Thanks.
We are so, when you talk about team, General Brown, we are so glad to have you on our team. And Michelle, Michelle is the president of our Cole Leadership Fellows. She's a rising second-year MBA student. And these are students, a core of students that we help develop to serve as first-year coaches and team facilitators for every single first-year MBA students. And we also have our Cole undergrad interns and scholars with us, many of them here today. And so we're just so blessed to have amazing, amazing team members. I want to thank you.
Makes me feel good about the future, Sonia, and I'll tell you that. They are amazing young leaders, no doubt about it.
Inspires hope, doesn't it? And wanted to thank our academic partners with us on these Zoom sessions, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion from Fuqua, the Business Oriented Woman, Duke Engineering, Baldwin Scholars, Duke Student Affairs, and American Grand Strategy. So this is a Duke team effort. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.